Welcome to This Happened Once Before, a conversation between generational Phish fans. I'm your host, Bill, and this week I'm joined by Ivy, who has been into Phish for about a year, but already has a few shows under her belt. We discuss how she got into the band, what she loves most, and then we dive into the show from May 24th, 1988, at the infamous Nectar's in Burlington, Vermont. Thank you to Ivy for participating in the conversation. Her passion for learning, knowledge of music history, as well as being the newest fan, acclimated herself perfectly in this episode. I'll share my thoughts on Ivy's show suggestion before next week's episode. In our prior episode, Joseph recommended the 8/31/12 show at Dick's in Colorado to me. Now, Joseph was correct in his assessment. I did enjoy the Dick's more than I've ever had before. The things that really jumped out that have always connected me with the band was how loose and how much they were enjoying themselves up on stage really comes through. That Yem Jam that Joseph mentions in the episode really does launch itself to really go what carries through the second set, culminating in an 18-minute chalk dust torture that was really fantastic, and then ends with a meat stick encore with Japanese lyrics to boot. So it doesn't get much better than that. So thanks, Joseph, for a great listen. I really appreciate the recommendation. Enjoy this episode today as we look at Phish's concert from May 24th, 1988 at Nectar's in Burlington, Vermont on This Happened Once Before podcast. Welcome to another episode of This Happened Once Before podcast about the band Phish, connecting multi-generations of their fans who've gotten into the band in the last couple of years, connecting with fans who've enjoyed the band for the last 30 plus years. So today we are lucky to have with us a new guest, and who's with us today?
My name is Ivy.
Ivy, welcome to the program. So Ivy, when did you get into Phish?
Yeah, I started listening to them about a year and a half ago, so not too long at all. I've been into this type of music previously, was always into the Dead and whatnot, but never heard a Phish song until about a year and a half ago.
And have you got a chance to see them?
I have. I just hit 5 shows after a fall tour.
So making the most of your time. No, I mean, within a year, I mean, that's pretty great. They don't play, 280 nights a year anymore. So,
right.
So 5 shows is 10% of the year, technically at this point, right? So what was the last show you saw?
I was at the Chicago run and did all 3 nights there. So Excellent. That would be the last time I saw them, the end of fall tour.
That's great. Yeah, that was they lit Chicago on fire for the weekend for sure.
Yeah. Yes, they did. I
was lucky enough to be at Dayton before that. So to see what, a precursor of what you guys were going to get, but it's, that they are firing on all cylinders after, seeing them this summer and then again in the fall. The folks heading to New York are in for a treat in a couple of weeks. So how many, are you familiar at all with the older shows? Like if you being only a year, I mean, there's a lot in front of you. So, when I say older, I'm looking 1988 to 1996.
Yeah, one of my favorite shows to listen to is 95 New Year's Eve. So that's probably the main older show that I've been into, but there's so much to get into. I've been trying to go through a lot of the New Year's, but again, there's a lot of years to go through. So I haven't made it through all of those, but 95 stands out to me as a fan favorite or personal favorite.
For sure. Yeah, that 95, for me personally too, was a really great year seeing the band. I got to see some great shows. Yeah. 95 holds a special spot, and they're really in an amazing place. I was actually just listening earlier to Halloween 95, and them doing the Who Quadrophenia is just, it's insane. You could hear the arena rock band that came out of that for sure. What's your favorite part of the scene?
Yeah, I think it's a different world than any other band I'm into. Just the community of it and the lot scene, all of that was very new to me. And again, just having the support, I feel like if I'm at a Phish show, the people around me have my back. Especially if you're going to, multiple nights in the same spot. I just feel like I'm like part of the family, and like even not knowing everything, only getting into the band a year and a half ago, I still just feel like very, very welcomed and yeah, just like very comfortable and safe. There's lots of generosity within the community, I'd say. And bad
That's
parts
amazing.
too, but we won't talk about that.
I'm sorry, what was that second part?
I said and bad parts too, but we don't have to talk
Sure.
about that.
Yin and yang, night and dark,
Yeah,
and that's unfortunate. But I think to focus on the first part of what you said, is to me really why I wanted to do something like this. And I think, there's a lot of conversations that happen at set break and before the lights
yeah,
go down and all that stuff, or in the lot, that can be informative and fun. And if you're, open to those conversations or want to hear more, there's a lot to hear.
yeah.
There's a lot to cover with this band. So do you feel, and I know this might be a difficult one being new to the scene, but is there anything you feel that like you might have missed that like, oh, I wonder what it was like back then? It doesn't seem like it happens anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just 90s Fish in general, like we talked about earlier, is a completely different band. And I mean, they were 30 years younger, so that helps. Just like the energy and like the chaos of the shows. Um, just like a lot more banter with the audience and just you never know what's gonna happen. Versus now where it's more like performance based, still absolutely amazing, no complaints. Very glad to have Fish around. But yeah, I think just not knowing what was going to happen and like the vacuum cleaner, like I know they still do that, but I don't know, to be there in like the early days of that and the early days of like the gags and their Halloween gags would just be mind blowing, I think. And listening to, the 90s shows, especially 95, I feel like I like really got it the first time I listened to that.
Hmm.
I feel like that's the band that a lot of people fell in love with, and there's still a similar act today, just like different energy, different chaos level. But I feel like that made me like truly get it.
That's
If
awesome.
that
That's a really cool way to phrase it. I think with this band, unlike the most parallel band they're compared to the Dead, the
Yeah,
Dead with the different keyboard players, it's easy to find eras.
yeah,
That's the Keith era, that's the Brent era, that's Big Pen era. Okay, but with these guys, it really does come down to stylistically, what are
mhm,
you feeling, right? And I think that's interesting coming from only being into the band for a year, finding this, to your point, 30-year-old style, and being like, oh man, that's the one that
yeah,
really stands out. So that's really interesting to hear. As somebody who was part of it, yeah, it was as much fun as it sounds like on
yeah,
tape, and having this experience going back and listening to these concerts. You kind of get those member berries, you get those, oh wow,
yeah.
that really was a lot of fun. And you smile and laugh at the same time. And but that's really incredible because you still have so many iterations of the band to unpack, right? And
Yeah.
that's kind of the hard part. What do you feel is like the most overwhelming of all of this?
Yeah, I think like you said, just all the content in it. I wasn't even alive in 95, so there's no way I could have been at those shows. So just like getting through all of that, understanding, especially like the lore too. I am still like at the tip of the iceberg on all of that. I recently learned about Antelope Greg. So that's been a fun one. And just all the lore with like the Helping Friendly book and all of that. It just feels like a lot to get into, and a lot of these people, like a lot of people just know it because they have lived through all of it. But like listening to the 95 show, and then I forget the other show, but the second set they do like the full um kind of tale and lore, and it's just kind of like a storytelling set. So that is, it's really nice and it's very accessible that we do have all the recordings and can go back and listen to it, but it is hard to break into. And all the songs. I don't know most of the songs. I every song I hear I like, and there's a lot of favorites I have, but going to a show I never ever expect to know every single song or what it is, but I know I have fun. So
Nor should you, and I think
yeah,
that was another one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because even though I could sit here and have a conversation with you, and you said I wasn't even born in 95, and that's fine. But what I was thinking was that, like, even when I saw them, I felt like I was behind.
Okay, gotcha.
Like even in the early '90s, I felt like, oh, there was somebody here before, somebody saw this before
Yeah.
I did, right? And I think it's kind of funny that Phish lore is now a fan. It's kind of funny to me when you're like, Antelope Greg, and I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
fan is now part of the lore.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to talk about Gamehenge or something like that, and I was like, okay,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, that as well.
yeah, the Antelope Greg and Gamehenge. There we go.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool perspective you bring there of, very much like I had in the '90s with the Dead, right? Like what the heck was
Yeah.
happening all those years ago, but you're still an observer. And I think
Yeah.
that's where it's like, I never wanted anyone in this scene to feel this way. And it sounds like you don't, and other people have not, which is like boxed out from the experience,
Yeah.
where it's like, hey, what's this song? You're like, yeah, don't worry about that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like not getting you the answer. So it's very cool to hear you say that you don't feel that way, and that this scene is still a place where people are open to these conversations. So with that in mind, I designed what I'm calling my Phish Proust questionnaire,
Yeah.
which I feel like is encapsulates a lot of the conversation that happens, when we're talking to folks. And my wife compares it to like a badge of honor that people talk about, like, what was your first show? Where you
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. So let's run down the list first. So what was the first Phish song you ever heard?
All right, this might be criminal, but it was Studio Farmhouse, and I loved it. And that was the kind of the catalyst. So I had a good friend who introduced me to Phish, and that was the reason that I listened to them. But Farmhouse was the first, and I still love Farmhouse. I'm still waiting on a live Farmhouse.
Yeah, I think, did that friend know your musical taste and use that as the segue, like for the intro for you specifically?
Yeah, so I just got on Spotify and hit the top songs, to
Okay.
be honest.
All right. There we go. Randomization of life.
Criminal. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've always like been into this type of music anyways, like lots of classic rock, blues, I was into the Dead too. So I don't think there was a bad song I could have picked. I think it just happened to be Farmhouse and it stuck, and I love Farmhouse.
I think it's a great song that marries the '90s vibe that you're talking about with the current version,
Yeah.
right? Like that is of that album run of like, here's some song, like here's some very
Yeah.
straightforward songwriting. That came out, Billy Breeze and Story That Goes, so that
Yeah.
3-album run is really, really strong. What was the first show you attended?
Yeah, it was this year, the spring tour opener at Climate Pledge.
Okay. And where's Climate Pledge?
It's in Seattle.
Okay. And how was that? Your first
It
experience?
was really good. I was very nervous going into it. I did go with that friend, so I was not by myself. I don't think I would have been able to break into it by myself. And then once I was there, it was, totally fun, totally fine. We danced, we had so much fun. And then the second night was where I felt like I could like let loose a little bit more and just felt like super comfortable. And just felt like it's okay. Like even if I don't know the songs, like I'm still like welcome here, like we talked about earlier.
Very much so.
First night was good, second night was great.
It's awesome. So of the 5 shows you've seen so far, what's the fave? What's the one that you enjoyed the most?
I would say night 2 of Chicago, October 14th. They put out some bust outs for sure, and just like the energy level that night, it was Saturday night, so I've heard that's more so like the party night, the big energy night, and they definitely came through with that. It was a big sing-along night for me too, because I knew a lot of the songs they played, so that helped. But just made it more fun.
What was the highlight?
I guess the highlight of the entire weekend would be the third night, Run Like an Antelope encore.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that was the encore. Yeah,
wrap it up,
yeah, it was a ball of energy for sure. So I can't really pinpoint a night that I didn't have as much fun.
Awesome.
And I learned lots of new songs, met a lot of cool people.
Very cool. That's awesome. And then further down the rabbit hole you have to go, right? All these new songs lead you further down the rabbit hole. Um, what's the favorite show you listen to that you haven't attended?
Um, I would say either Cinnamon Night of the Baker's Dozen or Looping Back to 95. Um,
That New
I
Year's Eve
love,
show?
yeah, I love the whole show, the Cinnamon Night with like Blaze On. I've listened to that set so many times. It's like burned into my brain. And I can't remember what year that was, but it was pretty recent.
Yeah, I think 17, maybe 2017,
Yeah,
2018.
yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's a special run that they did there. And that's like such a Fish thing, right? Like we're not going to
Yeah,
repeat, we're going to do this theme thing. If you ever get a chance, I don't know if you've seen the video of Metallica talking about it backstage, like when they were warming up about how Fish was going to do this and not repeat a song. And they're like, what are they, crazy? Like, how are they going to do that?
they are crazy.
They are crazy. Yeah, mad geniuses for sure.
Yeah.
What show do you frequently most recommend to others to listen to if you're trying to get somebody in?
Yeah. Okay, this is kind of a runaround answer. I feel like it's so overwhelming to recommend a whole show to someone. Because people had done that to me, and I was just like, okay, like this is 3 hours of Fish I have to not have to listen to, but like in
At
the
the time.
beginning, yeah. This is a 3 hour thing, you know, all of it is going to be a little bit different. Like what I feel like it's just easier to digest in smaller pieces. So totally would recommend. mm, I mean, honestly, any Halloween show, probably the White Album show, just because it's a lot of familiar songs, or something from 90s again too, just to get like the full feel for it, because I know what it like did to me when I heard those shows. But in general, I would probably recommend like a Blaze On jam, um, maybe an Antelope jam, and then like another probably classic one, maybe Joy or something, as just like specific songs. Just because I feel like it's a lot more digestible and more likely that they will listen to it rather than just kind of, putting this block of music in front of their face.
Yeah, I like
But that's
that,
just,
spoonful of sugar, right? You give them a little
yeah,
taste and then they don't have to choke on the whole thing. And coming from your perspective of, people tried to get me into the band and listen to this 3 hour thing. Meanwhile, it was, a 4.5 minute studio farmhouse, that was
yeah.
the real linchpin for you. So to everybody's going to get there their own way. And I love that. I think I can answer this from listening to the last couple of answers you gave me. What song are you hooked on right now?
Right now, I love Run Like an Antelope. I love Prince Caspian,
Mm.
and I'm really hooked on Love and Cup, which is I know is a cover, but I love their version of it, which I think might have been another one of your questions. So it might be ahead of
They
myself
are.
there.
That's all right. No, that's 2-1. That's fine. They are. They're America's greatest cover band. There's no doubt,
Yeah,
right? So there's no doubt in my mind that when you mentioned that Beatles '94, it really is a good entryway for someone because the Beatles are, for a lot of people, the soundtrack of their youth, or like
yeah,
that's, everybody kind of knows that. And it's like, oh, here's this band playing an album. You never heard that band play live,
yeah.
So that's an interesting perspective you brought. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. So what's the venue or where in the world would you want to see the band?
Yeah, I couldn't think of a specific one, but I would love to see them in an amphitheater. I love outdoor like summer shows, and I haven't been able to do that yet. So I do live in Seattle, so I'm hoping maybe the Gorge
I was
soon.
gonna say there's a
Um,
real nice one out that way. Yeah.
yeah. So that would be the dream. I'm not too big on the Sphere idea, just from what I've heard, but I would love to do just like an outside, like true Phish festival. Um, yeah, because so far I've just seen them in, sports arenas, which still fun, just a very, very different environment.
For sure. Yeah, I don't know. Indoors and outdoors. I mean, that can be a whole podcast in of itself about
Yeah.
debating the merits of both, right? We're gonna get Delaware next year. We're gonna get that big
Yeah.
festival. But I think the Gorge is one of those places that would be on my list too, that I haven't got a
Yeah.
chance to see them, that I would love to. That's a historic place in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And Gorge 98, I should have mentioned too earlier, I guess, for some of my favorite shows.
sure. What's your favorite studio album?
Um, I would say probably Billy Breeze, just because it
Mm.
is like very digestible. And one of the things with Phish when I first started listening to some of their songs is I didn't understand that there was so much lore. So hearing, stuff about Gamehenge and stuff about Fluffhead, I'm just like, okay, what is this? Like these guys are so weird. I like weird, but I just don't get it. So I'm just, kind of confused. But I feel like Billy Breeze is just very straightforward. So it may not be the overall best, but it's my personal fave. It holds a special place.
No, I think, if people listen to more than one episode of this podcast, they're going to hear me say it, but like that is their American beauty, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
That's where the songwriting really stood out. Like they went to Woodstock, recorded it, and you talk about lore, like the name Billy Breeze. It's named after Trey's daughter, right? Like so,
Yeah.
like even talking about something like that, where it's like the layers of the band go even further down. But yeah, I think that studio album was the launching point to the next wave of
Yeah.
like real concerted, hey, we're going to make something in the studio and work it out on the road first. All those songs were played live before they went into the studio. So
Yeah.
um so if you had to well, let's talk about the favorite cover song. I don't know if you gave that away already, if you want to stick to that
Yeah.
answer or you want to give it another answer.
Um, so I am very jealous of everyone who was in Dayton and got the walrus. But I am gonna stick with Lovin' Cup. I've just been on such a kick lately on that, and they did such a good version in Chicago. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with that one.
It's a great
But
one.
it's hard to pick for sure. They've
That's
done
such a
so
good
many.
one now. Yeah, when I learned that was a Stone song, I didn't know it was a Stone song the first
Oh
couple times
yeah.
I heard it, and it's like it doesn't fit into the model of what you think a Stone song would be, but they
Right.
they kind of own that one now in my head a little bit because I don't know
I
if the Stones
know.
ever blew it out the way the Phish blows it out.
No, totally agree. Yeah, no offense to Mick Jagger, but I like Trey's version.
No, I'll take this band at that age. I'll take the Phish at 80 going up there and doing this.
Yeah.
I don't they probably no trampolines at that point, but that's all right. So if you had to choose one, boy, man, God, or shit.
Oh gosh. Okay, so this is another thing that I like don't get.
Okay.
Um, so obviously Yem, yes, I understand that, but like what is this? What is this question?
Well, I took this question from the when I was not mocking, aping the Proust questionnaire. One of the questions is
Okay.
what is your favorite curse word?
Oh,
And I was like, all right, like that doesn't really fit in here, but like that part of the song, right? Those four words are kind of delivered in four different
right.
ways. So they kind of give a
Okay.
different vibe
Gotcha.
to however you're feeling about that in the moment.
I'm
Uh
gonna go with shit.
okay. Well that's gonna kick off the fun for sure, So no, and I think that's where, your answer may change like your favorite song and your favorite cover and all the other things that wind up changing over the course of this band because you
Oh
listen to
yeah.
a different version and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I like boy now. This is great.
Yeah. No, totally. I've had so many different like favorite jams and like favorite songs over the past year. Um, and then I'll listen to it. I'll listen to like every version I can find, and then I find a different song I like, and then that's the new thing. So there's just a never-ending amount of stuff to go through.
No, I said it to my wife the other day. I have ADHD, and I was like, I would love to know where the Venn diagram of like Phish fans and ADHD is, because like the hyperfixation and like going in on all of it is like
Yeah,
so
definitely.
all in. I'm gonna listen to that same song. It's not the same song though, because it's 40 different versions of it from 10
Yeah,
different years, so it's technically not the same thing. And then you get favorite versions from different years, right? I think that's
I know.
the beauty of all this. So the one what the show that brought us together today that we're going to talk about, forget about going into the 90s. We're going to go way in the wayback machine, as they say today. 5/24/88, famous Nectars, Burlington, Vermont. So did you know anything about anything I just said prior to listening to the show?
So I knew of like them playing at Nectar's and that being kind of the hot spot, they're kind of, CBGBs really. Um, I have never heard the show. There was a lot of songs, not a lot. There were a few songs that I'd never heard before. So that was fun. It was a very different show than the one I attended like a couple months ago for sure.
I don't think you're gonna see this kind of show again. I don't think
Yeah.
this is one you're gonna be able to catch in the next X hundreds of amounts of shows you see the rest of your life. And one of the reasons and one of the things I did choosing the shows for this first season was I tried to go back and think about the bootlegs that were constantly in my car's tape deck. Which ones were I constantly listening to? And this was one that was in the rotation heavily. There's one song on here that would have taken up a whole half of a tape back in the day, and we'll get to that point later. But it's really interesting going back and listening to it. I made a note here when I was like, I after listening to the show, there's 12 originals still in rotation, right? Including Haley's Comet and I Didn't Know.
Yeah.
And there's 5 or 6 covers that are still in the mix. And I think, it would be lazy of any other band to be like, oh yeah, since '88, here's the songs that they've been doing. But there's a lot of different versions of those songs, to your point.
Yeah.
From there to here.
No, absolutely. And I think what surprised me most about this show was all like the reggae influence. And I had no idea who Ja Roy was, but they brought him up on stage. You still don't? Okay.
My guess is that he was a friend, from the scene in Burlington. Nectar's was their home base. So you can tell by the crowd, asking him to play certain songs, or being very familiar and tip your waitresses and all that kind of stuff, that this is a college bar band, right? Like this isn't the Phish that you saw in Chicago or I saw in Dayton. These are 4 guys trying to figure it out still, in a way. And I think what came across to me is that the energy, not only from them, but the crowd is there throughout the whole show. Like it's a three set bar show, but everybody who's there is there to see them.
Yeah, no, totally. That was one of my main notes, because I love the audience interaction, which obviously, when you're playing arenas, that's just not going to happen at the level that it can in a bar. But I don't know, you can just tell that it's like a hometown band that all these people love. They're all there for the same reason, like you said. And yeah, they all just kind of get it because they're there and they hear the music, and it was amazing. I'm so jealous that I wasn't there or at any of these.
I actually wrote that down during one of the jams later on, and I was like, to be a person in this bar, I don't remember what song it was when we get to it, but and that's the interesting part, right? Because you do hear this dichotomy of a new band and like a band that's gonna be really good.
Yeah, totally.
And I think I said this to you before we started recording. If you do not like guitar-driven rock, this is not the show for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is still very much Trey's band. And, he was the reason people were paying admission, is my guess at this point, to come see them. By the set list we hear here, by the almost heavy metal, like shredding at some points of this show.
Yeah.
But to me, I remember... because again, to what we talked about earlier, even in '95, even though this is only 7 years prior, in '93, and it's only 5 years prior, this seemed like a world away. This seemed like, whoa, somebody saw them in Nectar's? That's crazy, right? And that just shows you how much this thing is just blown up exponentially over time.
Yeah.
So the opening number, which I think folks nowadays can appreciate, as a nice 14-minute curtain, the curtain width to open the show. What I thought was really interesting about that was that it sounds very similar to what we hear today with the curtain. That there wasn't a lot of structure changes or, huge changes from 1988 to now.
No, I totally agree. The only really notes I had on the first few songs were like they sound the same. It's the same like concept that, you know, Trey grew throughout the years, but obviously, different production level. They don't have it's just more raw, which I really like the sound of. And you can just feel how like young Trey is and how young the rest of them are. And they, like you said, are absolutely just shredding at some points of this and just like going wild. And I, would just love to have the video of this, be able to like fully live through it.
Well,
Yeah,
if somebody was
no,
alive at that time, I don't know how much it was easy to get video at that point.
Yeah,
See, like that's
fair.
VHS was even like big old cameras, so it wasn't like that would have even been easy. But yeah, no, that is very much a prevalent theme, throughout this whole three sets, right? That they are young, the music is incredibly young, and I wrote here. The song structure and sound are very similar today, and you hear the four-headed monster taking shape that would envelop the country within a decade, is what I wrote.
Yeah.
As someone who got swept up in that early tidal wave of that next decade to come, right? Because if we look at them in 88 and then, people 97, that's like the year everybody, okay, Phish 97.
Yeah.
That's even a whole nother act by the time we get to 97. But this is the thing that right away in this show, I believe you can hear that starting very early to be these four guys are better together than they are individually.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can tell when a band has it or when they don't. And I don't know, like, I feel like you can just tell, and I'm coming from a different perspective, obviously, of, they're a giant band now, they have this following. So, obviously they made it and obviously they were good back then, but I don't know, they just seem so excited and happy to be there. And I think it comes through in the music so well. And I don't know, you can just tell that they love it. They love it so much. They love the audience. And yeah, they still do. So I think totally right. None of that has changed.
I love that you said that about how you can feel the energy between them and the crowd this early on through, some 18th generation audio tape that we're listening to on re-listen. But somebody remastered it. I saw that before. So I think that's really cool because, and I was going to say the same thing, that's what keeps me coming back. That's why I saw them first in 93 and then again in 2023 is because of that feeling of reciprocation that comes from them in the audience, right? And I think, when everyone's there and everyone's locked in, it's nuts. And then whether it's 30 people in Nectars, right, or 20,000 at Madison Square Garden, they're still searching for the same thing. So I knew I left a note about it. It's at the 12-minute mark of the curtain with. So it's in the opening song of this show. I wrote, God, I wish I could have been in that bar listening to Trey play that. At the 12-minute mark of that opening track. So right away, right out of the box, they're not only comfortable, right, like to your point, but they are ready to go. There's not much warm up needed at this point.
Yeah, no, totally. They are beloved. I just think, they're like best friends at this point. They are just having the time of their lives. And I feel like it comes through. So that's a really good way to put it.
Awesome. So then we get into Rocky Top, which, the first cover of the night, which I thought was pretty interesting. The second one in, we're hearing Rocky Top, but it's fun, straightforward, got the crowd going.
Yeah, I was interested to hear, just kind of the different genres they brought in. I feel like that maybe less so happens, or at least the shows I've been to have been more of a guitar fest, which is, what I went for. So no complaints. But yeah, just hearing like the country background, a lot of blues, and then we had like the reggae sections too. I was just really surprised by all of that. But they did an amazing Rocky Top, so I can't complain about that.
And I think that's
I thought it was so cute.
Well, I think it's a great point that you hit on there. And as we go, as the show unfolds in front of us here, like the different genres, and I made a note about it towards the end, where they go from, you know, a very punk song into a very slow Taj Mahal cover.
Yeah,
That could be, you know, if you're not in, you know, if you're not someone who's in the bar like into this, you're like, what the hell did I just see? Right? Like, what happened?
exactly.
So that's a great observation there, that this you know, snapshot of them at this pinpoint in their lives in 1988, they're drinking through the fire hose of music, right? They're taking in as much as they can, to eventually then create this sound, to your point, that we
Yeah.
hear today, you know. And I think whether it's Ja Rule later on, or even you know, something like Haley's Comet, or I Didn't Know, with that acapella sound to it, is a
Yeah.
precursor of what's to come. All right, so they get through Rocky Top, they get through into Funky Bitch,
Yeah.
which my note here was, this this isn't the Funky Bitch you hear today.
No, I actually, so I was following along with the set list just because there were quite a few songs that I, didn't know or were just, was just curious to see what was happening next. Um, and yeah, it's definitely not. It is not what you hear today at all, but I did enjoy it. And it's definitely a version that I would go back to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking at that, and my note there about it's not the funk version that we have today. I made that note about another song in this show about this isn't the funk version we have today. And I think a lot of that goes to 97, what we were talking about before, where they changed all of a sudden, that they still have these songs in their repertoire. And then we're able to evolve them and, you know, create a sound that became, to a lot of folks, their most favorite, right,
Yeah.
of their evolution. Alumni Blues, which was in rotation, you know, pretty heavily early on. Not, I don't think, anymore in a long, long time. I don't know the last time they played it. I'm sure it's been a really long time. But you know, this was another example of Trey's guitar work, you know, just shredding, with the band right there with him. But he's definitely leading the way.
Yeah, that's one that I had never heard before. And listening to the show for the first time, I actually rewinded it and listened to it again because I liked it so much. And I was, just curious, like, is this their song? Is this a cover? And then obviously found out. But yeah, I love that song. I wish they would put it back in the rotation. But again, it's not, it's maybe like less funky than we're used to these days, but I love it.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now in real time, like, how close those guys were to having or getting their degrees right
Yeah.
at that time, right? Like 88, like they're not too far from either having them or getting them at that point. And then a completely ripping, torching Frank Zappa cover of Peaches and Regalia.
I love Frank Zappa. When I first started getting into Phish, I was kind of in the mindset that everyone else is, of like comparing them to the Dead when they're, kind of in no way like the Dead other than the format of it. Some of the same inspirations, but I think Phish is so Frank Zappa. And after you get into it, I get it. With all of like, Zappa's weird stuff, I always loved that. But getting into Phish's, it like makes a lot more sense, especially starting at like closer to the beginning of the career, why they are like they are. And it makes so much sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, you know, one of those things that they have in common, and that I love, the, you know, and to be quite honest, like, Phish introduced me to Zappa, right? It wasn't the other way
Okay.
around. Like, I kind of knew who Zappa was. I'd heard Eskimo Joe and all that, you know, Joe's
Yeah.
Garage, and, you know, Don't Eat
Yeah.
the Yellow Snow, and those kind of songs. But or organized chaos, structured chaos, you know, and I've always been a fan of jazz, but like, to hear it in a rock form of
Yeah.
like, hey, that wasn't a jam. Somebody actually structured that music to sound so chaotic in a
Yeah.
way that is a real form. Um, to your point about their similarities, like, to me, that's where I connect the most, is that like a composer mindset of like, it's not going to be a straightforward, we're going to get from here to here. You're going to go all over the place, and it's going
Yeah.
to sound like we don't know where we're going or where we're going to land, but I promise you, we're going to bring this back down.
And they always
Um,
do. So I put my trust in them.
Listen, and if they don't, they don't. And I think that's where, they feel the less pressure, definitely now. I don't know, the audience will always put that pressure on them. But when, now the fear of failure or the fear of or having to impress has to be completely wiped away, from their worries, where, probably up until Big Cypress, because they never had record sales to back it up or anything like that besides ticket sales, right? So you were catering to that audience. Golgi comes up next, which I think is probably, one of those earliest Phish songs around. But Page really, I wrote a note here, Page playing really stood out here in my opinion.
Yeah, again, that was another one that I did rewind and listen to again. Mostly because I've heard that song, I know that song, heard lots of versions of it. But it was really fucking good. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse, but they, like, for lack of better words, it was so good. And again, it just kind of felt explosive. And like you said earlier, organized chaos. I love that. I think that should be their tagline. That is like truly what they are. But yeah, there's just, it sounds so different from a lot of them that I have heard, but just fantastic. Like, lack of better words.
Yeah, for a song that like could be, sophomoric in a way.
Yeah.
Because I think he wrote the lyrics in high school, but like, it's still played today. It still resonates all these years later. But yeah, this was one with just a real straight up fire version of it.
Yeah, very Phish.
Very Phish. Yeah, you had said that should be their tagline. I think one of the best ones I saw, I think it was like on the volume 3 of the Almanac back in the day, but somebody said it was ice cream for the brain.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so never bad ice cream. It's always good, regardless. So
yeah, I like that a lot.
Whoever said it, take the credit for it. I'm sure someone will comment below and tell me it wasn't me, because I know it wasn't me. So we talked about the unfunkification of Funky Bitch, and I think that comes up again with Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley.
Yeah, I felt like that one was just very raw and very just like, we're gonna play this song. Yeah, it was amazing. It felt like very energetic, but also not a lot of frills, which I really liked.
Yeah, I think to equate your raw, I wrote a very bar band cover.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like Trey driving, very bar band cover. And then I wrote willing to take a chance, and then the vocal jam, right? Because that goes to your point about like, it's not just a straight, Robert Palmer cover here. It goes into fishy territory.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I've ever heard another one with a vocal jam, to be honest. And then, probably if I had to go back, it's probably been played at almost every Phish show at that point in their career, Susie Greenberg.
Yeah.
I said similar to the Curtain with very similar structure to what we're hearing today. There hasn't been a lot of change in the Susie Greenberg.
Yeah, that's the note that I had too. Just like a really nice evolution of keeping it the same, but also like, obviously they're aging with it, but they're still bringing like the same, I guess, like core values to the song is what it felt like. Like, it felt like I could have heard that, like you said, like in Seattle or something, like here at the show, which I think they did. But it was amazing still.
Right, and I think that's that again, one of those things that just shows you that you don't necessarily need huge evolutions in the song, and that they can resonate just the same all these years later, right? And I don't know if I said that Susie closes the set. If I did, that's not true, because the next song pretty much is a synonym for what's about to come, in my opinion, in the second set, a Jimi Hendrix Fire cover.
Yes.
And another one that's still in rotation when you're lucky enough to hear it. But this one was, I feel like, played at 3 times the speed of normal Fires.
Yeah, that was one. I don't know if I've ever heard them cover that. So that was a newer one for me. I thought it was a great set ender. I'm not gonna lie, I was looking forward very much to the Fluffhead in the second set. So I was like kind of looking at the same time.
Feet ahead.
Yeah, I was getting a little bit ahead, but No, totally great. I love their covers so much, and it just feels, like it becomes their song, like you said, with like Love and Cup.
Yeah,
They just do it so well. They don't try to, they're not trying to copy Jimmy. Trey is, one of the best guitar players ever. So, he's not trying to copy Jimmy. He is Trey. And it's amazing. It's crazy what they do.
yeah, 4 minute mark is what I wrote. So there must be something at that 4 minute mark. I try, just to mark those spots where I shake my head kind of thing and just
Yeah.
smart, a little smirk. But I wrote fast paced opportunity for Trey to shred, pardon me, 4 minute mark. So, 4 minute mark is probably towards the end of that song and just really just charging on all cylinders to close
Yeah.
out that first set. Yeah, and to your point about peeking ahead to the second set. Now, this is the one that I probably listened to the most of back in the day on tape. This
Gotcha.
second set where it's only 3 songs, but I think
Yeah.
the shortest one comes in at maybe 15 minutes. It does,
Yeah.
yeah. So 15 minutes. So it's not short on music. We'll get to the one that I think is just insanely off the charts, but it starts out, ironically enough for you, Jesus Left Chicago,
Yep.
which really swampy blues. I
Yeah, that
felt
was
in
my
this,
note too. Like the most blues I've ever heard Phish be, really.
and it let Page come out. It highlights his playing, his singing. And another. Did you get this in Chicago this year? Did they play that?
No,
Or no? Oh, okay. So that would have been a little too on the nose, but
I yeah, it would have been nice, but
I felt that it was like, as much as I've said in the first set, like, oh, this is Trey's band at this point. This allowed not only us as listeners, but the audience there, right, to see how much more talent exists beyond the front man.
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think again for me, just to like see their influences and like them, I guess proving in a way that they can play all these different kinds of music, but at the end of the day, it's still, like you said, Trey's spin on it. It's still Phish. It's still like so identifiable as Phish. And like that's why the people are there. They're not there to see exact covers of these songs. They're there to see Phish's version. Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, so good. I love Paige. Yeah, great song.
Well, and now we move into what could maybe quintessentially be called the most Phish song of all time, Fluffhead.
Yep.
I think that might be one that you put in the time capsule. If somebody's like, you got to pick one song to let the future hear what this band Phish was about. I'd be hard pressed to not, at least have that on my list of final qualifiers.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I've gotten two live fluff heads. So at both
Wow.
runs I went to, they played at both times, which the first one I, knew it because like you said, it's just quintessential Phish. It's one of those that even if you are trying not to listen to the weird songs in the beginning, you have, essentially no choice. Fluffhead is there. Fluffhead is like screaming in your face. You have to do it. So I have very, very fond memories of seeing it for the second time. And again, you hear like the beginning notes coming in on this recording too. And, you can't help but smile because Fluffhead's coming and it's going to be awesome. You don't know what they're going to do, but it's going to be long. It's going to be danceable. It's going to be fun. And I think, yeah, like you said, Fluffhead is Phish.
Yeah, and I think, what we were talking about earlier about the organized chaos, right? And I think this is one of those songs that's like, we're going to feed you organized chaos surrounded by, chorus and verse.
Yeah.
Versus just like boy, man, God shit, right?
Yeah.
Like, as we were talking about earlier. This is going to give you a story, right? And it's going to tell you, the story of this individual But with the music, that sounds like it's going to come undone at 5 or 6 different points throughout the whole song.
Yeah. Um, it definitely does. It definitely is chaotic. There were some points that I had like bookmarked within the show, um, of just them like almost like losing control, it feels like. But I mean, like in my mind, I'm sure they have it like under control and like they're just having like the time of their lives and playing and jamming. And then, by the end you hear the notes again of like the intro of Fluff, and it just feels right. You don't even know where you've been, you don't know where you went on this like journey of Fluffhead, but you had a good time. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. I like to go through and like listen multiple times and just try to focus on like different points and like different, instruments and sounds that they're doing. And it's a lot. It's so much to hear, especially, if you're at the concert under any sort of influence. I think I would have probably lost my mind if I was at Nectar's that night.
And I'm sure everybody was on something at Nectar's, at least
Yeah,
alcohol, right? They're in a bar. So,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, Fluffhead always provides that soft landing spot for you at the end there, to your point. You got
Yeah.
to end it nicely. So, what stood out of this version to you?
Yeah, I think to like go back to the energy of it and just like the intimacy of the venue.
Mm.
Fluffhead wasn't what we know it as now. I'm sure it was still, a popular song. It was one of their songs, one of their go-tos, but I feel like Fluffhead now is just like this enigma. And then I think it's just so special that they were just going just as hard then as they are now on it, if not harder. So I guess not one single special point, but just them totally letting loose. And, it was a long song. I love them for that. I think it is so, maybe overwhelming to stick in like the first set or, present that to someone who has never heard Phish before. But it's amazing. It's just crazy what they do whenever they're like comfortable and ready to let loose.
Well, what's pretty interesting too, there to your point, is that this is a pretty young band who's very comfortable creating a 15-minute song.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a jammed out version. This is just Fluffhead, right? Like you're getting the song. So I think that's a really interesting observation that like from obviously very early on, it's on the first album and all that kind of stuff. But they knew they weren't going to be in a box, right? Like there wasn't going to be the 4-minute pop song coming off of there, the radio friendly,
Right.
that came later at Longboy. But yeah. And I think what it leans into and what it turns into is what, to me, when I was that young fan in 93, was some of the most badass Phish I had ever heard in my life. And that is the 26-minute whipping post that takes place after Fluffhead. It stands up. All these years later, I listen to it and I shake my head and I wrote mesmerized, right? Like that. I was like, this is insane. This is like it's an insane version of a song that makes you want them to play it again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I guess, is like looking back on like my short journey with Phish, like a year ago, I don't know if I would have listened to the second set and got like the same thing out of it, of just like, this is amazing. This is, mesmerizing, which is like, that's the word I would describe like the first time I heard, 95 New Year's Eve, was just like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. I totally get why people are on the bus or, have read the book or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, up until that point, I was just, kind of overwhelmed by it. And like, if I would have heard, Fluffhead into Whipping Post, I think I would have just like, my brain would have like shut down from like everything going on. But yeah, now I feel like I can sort of go on the ride with them. And even if I'm not totally, like with Fluffhead, like rewinding and like listening to the different parts of it, even if I'm just like enjoying it like throughout the moment, it's still, a special thing, I would say. And it's definitely, it's them creating, and like you said, not putting themselves in a box, and they refuse to. And I love that.
Well, yeah, I mean, a 26-minute cover song in a bar band, at this point of your career, it's pretty brazen, right? It's pretty brazen. Like, there's gotta be somebody who walked in off the street who's like, "Oh, Allman Brothers," and then like walked out 10 minutes later when the song was still
Yeah.
going on. But yeah, it was one of those things. I think that being, getting into the band when I did and hearing this was like, all right, I don't know all the whole catalog yet. I don't know the lore of Gameenge and all that kind of stuff, but
Right.
I know this song. I know this song already, right? So like this is another entryway in. But it was, and I also think part of the time, the way that we traded these concerts, these bootlegs on tape, you were
Yeah.
limited to time. So, that 26 minutes took up one side of a tape. So there's
Yeah.
something psychological about that too, where you're like, all right, I can pop this in and I'm going to get through the whole thing, right? Like that mindset. And, back to the overall theme of the guitar driven show, this is 26 minutes of it, right? Like him being the guitar wizard at 20, whatever he is at this point, just showing everybody in the bar like how good he could be with the instrument in his hands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think anyone at that show can come out of that and say that he's not, one of the best guitar players. Yeah, I mean, even from like such a young age, it's insane. And to be in a bar at that point, like it just feels like Mecca almost of like whoever saw them there is just it's crazy.
Yeah, and somebody saw the Dead in the Hate back in the day, and right, and
Yeah.
somebody saw Goose in the where they first, like somebody's gonna
Yeah.
be the first person, right? And it's like as long as you get it and get there, like, and there's different varying degrees of getting there, right? Like not
Yeah.
everyone's gonna want to like, hey, let's go on a podcast talk about Phish, right? That's not everybody's thing, but there's gonna be a lot of people who want to listen to it and want to know more and want to go down the rabbit hole with us. So
Yeah, no, absolutely.
so if I'm assuming that everybody who was left in the bar for the second set with the whipping post and the fluff head was hanging around for the third set, because we're a bar band at our most loose.
Yeah.
Special guests on stage, the best reggae cover of Yamar maybe ever with like actual reggae.
I thought that was really cool. I've gotten a Yomar before live, and this is a very different version. I was very, very confused whenever they, started yelling for Ja Roy or like inviting him up on stage. I was like, what is going on? And then he had like a pretty long feature up there. But just like, I don't know, like the community of it, like it just feels like from such an early stage, like everyone was like welcome almost, and like yes, this is a show, but it's also kind of like our playground and we can do whatever we want and we're going to do this next.
I
And
love that. I love the playground. Yeah, that's great. I like that idea of it, right? Because then that comes up later with Richard Wright coming up on stage, who wrote, Halley's Comet, and I didn't know, but like that aspect of like, yeah, we're just going to bring up people on stage and it's cool. Like, don't worry about it. And they felt no pressure to perform anything than than they wanted to, and I think that's really something that they've held on to all these years later, right? Like nobody's going to be like, you should play this and this. That's never going to happen.
yeah, no, absolutely not. That's why I mean, you just have to keep going to get your songs in. Every song you want to hear, you just have to go to a million shows, and that's fine.
It. That's it. They're going to keep chugging on too, so I'll be there.
Yeah,
and to your point, even back then in 93, 94, when I didn't know who Ja Roy was, right? Like I didn't know. I'm like, what the heck is this? So it's always kind of been that thing of like it had to be there, right? And that's kind of the beauty of this band too. Halley's Comet, which I just mentioned, Richard Wright comes out. People kind of just friends with them in college, wrote those two songs. But another thing to your point about the looseness of it, being like, yeah, come on up, play trombone. Oh no, I think it was Phish playing trombone, but just to even be up there with the band is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and to be like an audience member in that too, of just like, oh yeah, like this is what we're doing, deal with it. You're about to see probably something amazing, but we just decided to do that. And I think, that's a lot of what I missed. And like they still do it to an extent, but just in like a very different way, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think one of those things that has real, and I think it's a conscious decision by them now that they play less, is less guests.
Yeah.
Derek came out for the summer show for the
Yeah.
fundraiser, and like Derek and Trey did that album, right? Which they should tour on that, but like they that he could play with anybody anywhere, right? He's Derek Trucks. But it's like they're at the point now where it's like, back in the 90s, it'd be like, oh, here's John Popper, here's, guys from Widespread Panic, here's people from Dave Matthews, O'Teal, right? Like he would, O'Teal would jump in. So I think it's probably, I do think it's probably conscious on their part, right? Like we're only playing X amount of shows. Like, let's just give them us. But I do love special guests, right? Like it does make something different. I think I got to see the Dude one time come out and sing.
Oh.
Yeah. So then they go into one of the best ZZ Top songs, and definitely my favorite Phish cover of a ZZ Top song, LaGrange. It's just, I wrote chugging is what I wrote. Like it just chugs, like that song, the whole band is just chugging along with them. And it's definitely there for Trey to play the guitar on, but it's definitely one of those covers that they own pretty early on.
Yeah, I mean that's a very familiar song to me. So it was, again, nice to hear. And I feel like for the audience, a lot of them probably knew that song too. So just like another opportunity to sing along. But at the same time, like, own it. And I think, at this point, the whole theme is, can Trey shred on this song? Okay, yes, okay, we're gonna play it. And yeah, I mean, I have a special place in my heart for the ZZ Top version, but Phish does it well. I have no complaints. It wasn't my standout cover, but no complaints.
No, I love when Mike takes that first part and then it switches over to Trey's voice for the like that's just so good. Then Fee, which I wrote fresh and new. It was a crowd favorite from early on. People, were in this specific show, you could hear people requesting it. But Paige sounded great, the crowd, but you could just tell this was one that it was almost of the mindset that like, hey, let's play like a 5-minute straightforward song.
Yeah.
Let's create.
Yeah, and I think they still do that. Like the very similar setup to what they're doing now of, you have like some quick punches and then some absolute dance parties of like the longer jams. But yeah, I love when Paige sings, so I can't dislike a song that's Paige is on.
Then you have to go listen to that Quadrophenia that I was listening to earlier at 95 Halloween, because you'll love it. So to your point, right? Like to your point of Get Up and Dance, I Know a Little by Leonard Skinner, which very much, and I only put this now together because we talked about like the swampy bluesy sound of Jesus Left Chicago, but the boogie woogie sound that they play in I Know a Little is almost, those two things are almost Skinner-esque, right? The ability to go swampy blues and boogie woogie. But it showed the level of their play, in my opinion, at that point, right? Everyone was kind of highlighted on that.
Yeah, no, I would agree on that. I did not realize that was a Leonard Skinner song. So
I had to go back and look. I was like, is this Skinner or is this ZZ Top? And before we went on, I looked, and it is Skinner.
Okay.
But yeah,
I feel like that needs to make a lot more sense for me to know that it is a Leonard Skinner song. I think I checked a while ago and I just totally forgot what it was. But yeah, there's definitely like still like the blues undertone in it, which I like. It's just it's very different. Like you said, when, the funky stuff started happening, it's still just a different way, I guess, to highlight their playing. Like you'd mentioned before.
Right. And then we go from using words like swampy bluesy, boogie woogie blues to probably the most punk aspect of this show and of their catalog, I would say. I never would equate them to punk music, though I think they have a lot of punk ethos.
Yeah, totally.
But this is definitely their most punk song ever.
Yeah.
Like, Black Furry Creature from Mars.
This was one of the first songs that I was recommended actually because I love punk music. I'm like very into that type. So, a friend was trying to show me like, oh, look, Phish does punk too. And I like listened to it and I was like, okay, like what is this? Like this is not like anything I've ever heard this band do. Like what is going on? Um so the studio version left me probably confused more than anything, but like hearing it live and like now I've heard like quite a few live versions, it just makes so much sense. And it is Phish. Like, sure, it's like has the punk undertones, but it is such a Phish song. And I think anyone who covers it, it's still gonna sound like Phish. Um, and I love it. I love that how intense it is. Same with like Tweezer Reprise and like Antelope, like whenever those just get to like the peak of the jam, I feel like my brain just like quits working and I'm just like inside the jam. And I feel the same about this song. I love it.
Yeah, I saw some amazing versions back in the day, like Trey just running around in a circle on stage, screaming like with a bullhorn. It is definitely them, definitely them at their most fun. And then we couldn't go further from that in a complete 180. Put a really, really pretty, sweet, bluesy Taj Mahal cover of Corina.
Yeah, it was beautiful and it definitely was night and day listening, but I like that. And like you said, third set, anything goes, and that's what they were doing. Is that a cover song as well?
Yes, that's Taj Mahal.
Okay, I did not realize that. I thought it was just one of their older songs. Yeah, it was beautiful. And one of the reasons that, I think I initially loved Farmhouse was so much was Trey's voice, because it is the studio version. You don't get to hear, the others as much, or like the instruments aren't quite highlighted like they are in like a live version. But I think he just has such a beautiful voice. And to have that plus the ability to play the guitar like that is, one in a billion to
Yeah,
to have both of those. Because you look at like Bob Dylan, love him, great guitar player, horrible singer, still like him, but it's not like the sweet voice like Trey has, and he's able to do songs like this and like the softer side, and just chill a little bit in between the crazy songs.
very much
So that
so.
was another.
Yeah. Cool. I like that. So then they end in a typical Phish fashion, right? So at that we're all sweet and bluesy over now, and we go into um Harpua,
Yeah.
which at this part of the evening I wrote they have a carte blanche for weirdness, and the diehards are around this late is what I wrote. Because you know pieing as a bar band, like there's a lot of things here that you have to be doing where you already have an engaged audience.
Yeah.
um it stood out to me, there's no story in this version of the Harpua, it's just the Harpua story. No Trey voiceover or annotations that he does along the way. But really good. It's kind of a little up and down with the goldfish at the end, and it's just it it was a great version of a song that I'm not sure how early in its carnation it was, but
Yeah.
it definitely, you can hear them being very comfortable with being different.
Yeah. So that was the first Harpua I've ever heard. So I am totally unfamiliar with, like the different versions they might do. Um, I had to look it up, and I guess it's not played as much anymore, which is disappointing. But do you have like a recommendation on what would be like a classic Harpua?
Seven, 7/16/94.
All right.
That's my favorite.
All right. Perfect. I knew you'd have one. So
Yeah, I was there for that one, so I'm partial to that one.
of
That
course,
whole that
yeah.
whole show, that whole show is insane. But that one
No, and I
specific.
really liked the song. I just never heard it before, so I'm interested to hear, I guess, like the voiceover, and that definitely feels like a 90s thing and 80s too.
Oh,
Um,
the stories that come out of that. Yeah, there's in the one for the one I recommend, there's giant comets crashing into Jupiter. So yeah, enjoy that one. And that also takes place in Vermont. So maybe it's just the hometown stuff.
yeah,
Uh
okay.
and, and then they close out with you must have been very happy for
Yeah.
Run Like an Antelope. Fiery,
Yeah, it was out of control.
fiery.
Sorry, what?
No, I said fiery
Oh,
version of it. Yeah.
yeah, I felt like there was like a longer lead up, less climax in this one versus like some others that I've heard. Not a bad thing at all, but I felt like I was just like bouncing, waiting, and then it just comes out of like absolutely nowhere and they're out of control. And yeah, I mean, not much has changed. They still play with like that much intensity in Antelope. Um, also a favorite because of the lore behind it, the fan. So just like weird things like that like get me like attached to songs. But yeah, I think it's a classic. And if I was there, that being the set closer, there's no way that I would be able to not go back and see them again if I was, in that local area. That would
100%.
that would be the decisive thing for me, would be the antelope at the end.
Well, like you said, you can't really put where it changes. I did. It's at the 5:30 mark and it goes
Okay,
till the
fair
8+ minute
enough.
mark because it just goes nuts from that point on. I looked and I was like, when does that start? Because I got caught up in the middle of it and I went
Yeah.
back and listened. I was like, oh boy, that's been going on for a bit. That 7/16/94 has an amazing antelope on it as well.
All right.
So, as someone who's new to the band, only been in for a year, is this a show you would recommend to another new fan?
Yeah, I guess it would not be the first one I would recommend just because of how different they are now and how, young they were and just kind of like the chaos we talked about of all the different genres. And, like you said, oh, we're going to have people on stage now, surprise guest. But definitely, I think I'm at a really good point in like the Phish journey to listen to this because it just kind of connects a lot of things for me and makes a lot of sense. But I would never give this to someone as like their first show and then like take them to a show and it's not like anything from the show essentially. There's bits and pieces, but um I think it's a really good show for maybe like a casual fan who still needs like the deep dive and still needs to like fully get it about like why Phish is Phish.
Like that. I like that a lot. Now, I asked you to come prepared and recommend a show to me post 2011.
All right. So this might be a cop out just because the best show is the one you were at, but I wanted to recommend the second night of Chicago, the 10/14/23.
Okay.
I think it's just a dance party, and if you haven't already listened to it, which you might have, I think you'll love it.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. I'm looking forward to that recommendation. I'll email you, let you know my
Awesome.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Uh, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about this band that we both love. And if there's anything you think of after the fact, please feel free to reach out to me. We'll talk some more or any recommendations you need. But it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Enjoy your time learning all the things that you're about to learn with this band. And definitely, hopefully, we'll cross paths at some show somewhere along the line.
Yeah, I will see you there. And thank you for having me too. It's not too often that I feel, fully welcome and like fully open to talk to like a 1.0er with, without any expectations, I guess, of knowing everything. So it was
Well,
awesome. And I learned a
I
lot.
hope you felt comfortable doing so because, yeah, this is the whole point
Yeah.
of this was to connect a 1.0, I guess, as whatever I may be. But to a younger group of fans to say, as the title of this podcast says, this happened once before.
Yeah.
This is not new, but it's going to be new every time we get to see him. But it was a
Yeah.
real pleasure meeting you. It was a pleasure having this conversation, and let's talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to hear the episode.
Definitely. Thanks, Ivy.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you're an older fan who'd like to recommend a show from 1988 to 1996, or a new fan who'd like to be part of an upcoming episode, email the show at happenedoncebefore@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening, and I hope this happens once again.
Thoughts from my only breath that I have breathed since I was 10.